Okay, so what I wanted to first start with was my narrowband AP workflow. Of course, first I start with the arcsine hyperbolic stretch as normal to preserve data optimally, and then I separate out each channel. So I look at the red, green, and blue channel respectively. They contain specific narrowband signal data. I'll show you all how I extract them individually, and then I use the monochrome executable of StarNet++ on each of the channels to form the three monochrome starless images for each of the narrowband signals. And then from there, I use the normal total RGB stretched image and remove the stars using StarNet++ such that I can create a stars only image, exactly how I did in my tutorial with StarNet++. And then what we do on each of the individual channels, the starless channels, is we perform slight noise reduction, and I'll show you what I use to do that. And then we go from there and we recombine the data using split complementary colors using my special recombine process. And then after that, and along the way, as we're doing the recombination, we're going to be doing level adjustments and as well as detail, contrast, brightness enhancement through the camera raw filter in Photoshop. And then we recombine the stars at the end for our final image. So let's jump right into Photoshop. So right here is the Wizard Nebula. I took this data about a year ago or so. It's 57 sub exposures, each 300 seconds using the Triad Ultra filter. So I'm going to supply this data so you guys can work along with me. And I'm going to start at the very beginning and just progress through an entire example of how I manage and handle this data. So, all right, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to go to is image mode, and we're going to convert this to 16 bits per channel. And we're not going to use this local adaptation. We're going to go to exposure gamma, leave it at defaults, hit OK, and then I like to come check out the histogram. Here you can see my channels aren't aligned perfectly, so we're going to go ahead and take care of that. So I'm going to duplicate the layer here, and I'm just going to call it channel mixer layer. Then we're going to go to adjustments, and we want to hit the channel mixer and pop up the histogram tool. So you guys, if you've watched my previous tutorials, you've seen how I typically handle this. So if we're in the red channel, we go to the green because the green's ahead, and we bump up the green signal in the red channel such that we move the red channel right aligned with the green channel. When that happens, you'll see that in the color histogram chart above the combined one, you see this yellow signal kind of form as the green and red merge together. And then we go to the blue channel and we pull from the green in the blue channel up once again to pull the blue signal all the way up to align with the green channel. And what we get is kind of this gray bar right in the center here, showing us that we've kind of aligned the signals to the best that we could. Then we hit OK. Then from here, Control Alt Shift E stamps everything we've done in these bottom layers to a new layer, and we're going to start with an initial levels adjustment. So Control L will open up your levels, and then I go to each channel and I just kind of go right up to where the data is beginning to start with on each of the channels. This may be slightly different per channel at the moment, but of course after we do the arc hyperbolic stretch, then all we have to do is look at the RGB signal side, and everything's going to be scaled proportionally such that one of these level adjustments will work on each channel. But for the moment, each channel will get its own kind of level correction. And we kind of iterate through this process until we get our data as far to the left in this histogram as possible, and then we'll be ready to apply the arcsine hyperbolic stretch. So go to the red channel. This time I'm going to do it just a little bit more into the data, not a whole lot. And this is kind of to preference. You can go through this. I've kind of learned with my data, my signals that I get, what works and what doesn't. And I usually get this secondary spike right here. And I try to avoid cutting that off because that's data. But so I only kind of go right up to it when I am adjusting levels. And I kind of do all my iterations here with the levels subtly, just a little at a time, being very meticulous and paying attention to as much as I can. So you can see now the spike has changed now that I've done another levels adjustment here on the red channel. Allows me to kind of finally kind of push my levels up a little more on each iteration. So let's do it to the green. Now the blue again. Let's go again. The red. just a little more. Green, same thing. Blue. So I'm going to keep doing this. This is looking pretty decent. I don't know how much more improvement I can get. Definitely here on the green channel I can. See if the blue is similar. All right, getting close. Okay. So now I'm going to hit Control-Alt-Shift-E, stamp that to a new layer, and this one's I'm going to call Gray Multiply. I'm going to hit Control-U. That brings up the hue, saturation. I'm going to bump the saturation all the way down because we want to make a gray image for the arcsine hyperbolic stretch. And then I'm going to hit Control-C here, Control-V, and I'm going to rename this second one Divide. And then here in the Multiply, I'm going to go over here to this pull-down menu, and I'm going to go all the way to the Multiply. And then in the gray, I'm going to go down to the Divide. And now it's going to look funny like this, but it's an error in the cache of Photoshop. You have to go to at least like 67%, I believe, before the data comes back in your view. But this goes away after we do this stretch operation and we recombine using the Control-Alt-Shift-E and stamp it forward. That cache error is no longer present. And so it's only for this intermediate stretching. So you can see right now, there's faint details of the wizard here. We haven't done any stretching, only levels adjustments. So let's go ahead and just check the levels one more time. Just want to look here at what's going on. Yeah, I think that will be decent. So if we hit Control-M, and if you've watched my previous tutorials on the arcsine stretch, you'll know what I'm going to do here. If you haven't, this is a good point to stop, go back and watch those to see how I've got these presets loaded. But we're going to go to the arcsine presets. And so I'm going to start with an arcsine 30 stretch, and that looks pretty good. That's brought out a lot of details. So somebody actually left a comment on my arcsine hyperbolic stretch who knew a lot about the PixInsight algorithms and specifically the arcsine stretch. And they told me that technically, if you're going to try to replicate as close as possible to an arcsine hyperbolic stretch, you only want to do 2 iterations of the stretch. So you might want to do an arcsine 30, and then after that, another arcsine 30 or arcsine 10, whichever you prefer and whatever's working with your data better. So you might have to use these higher ones on certain data sets depending on your system, but you only want to do 2 iterations of it, and that approximates a really good arc hyperbolic stretch. So I'm going to start with this arc 30. I like it. I'm going to hit OK, go to the histogram, refresh it, and we see that we're going to have some levels adjustments to occur. And also, my channels aren't as aligned as I'd like anymore now that we're kind of closer up. And so we may do something about that to keep the channels aligned. But for now, I think I'm just going to proceed and fix those channels in a moment. So let's go ahead and do the levels and just subtly boost it up to the end of the data, and we'll keep working our way ever so slightly, just like we do in the beginning level stretch. And so now I'm gonna doing the level stretch on the RGB, but I can do it on the others. But like I had said before, everything's scaled now when you do it this way with the gray and multiply divide, so you can just work on the RGB channel. So now I'm probably gonna go, well, that's letting me adjust decently. So I'm gonna keep subtly making incremental changes here on the levels, just so that I don't cut off any of my black data. That's looking pretty decent there. So I'm very meticulous with how I do this. This usually maximizes the amount of details, even in the shadows that I get. So this is pretty good here. Kind of like where I'm sitting right there with my data. And look at the histograms. That kind of helped align them. But let's go ahead and do our second arcsine stretch. So I can look at the 30 and I'll look at the 10 and see what I like better. So that kind of has some overstretched look to it, but also we're going to have to do another levels adjustment if we chose the arcsine 30 again. If we look at the arcsine 10, it looks pretty good. I still see a good amount of details, but it looks like when we do the levels adjustment, it'll be less. But since we already have a nicer dark background sky with decent details, I think this is kind of the less aggressive approach. And I like to stay less aggressive because it seems to show at the end result. So let's go ahead and stick with the arcsine 10. Hit OK. Refresh the histogram. And we're going to do a levels adjustment now. I usually, if I don't see data and it's kind of very flat, sparse, or limited data, I kind of go halfway in before I see the first kind of hump or spike of data, or first kind of exponential increase in the histogram there. Hit OK. Control L. Let's do that again, tad bit less. Control L. Again. Another reason why I don't want to go too hard on the stretch is because then you start bringing out more noise issues, and the goal is to kind of get rid of as much noise as you possibly can. So I think that's probably pretty good here. Refresh the histogram, and I like the way that looks for now. So I'm going to go to the gray divide channel. I'm going to just click it once, and I'm going to hit Control Alt Shift E, stamp it forward. And now what we can do on our keyboard is hit Control 0, and that kind of zooms us out. And we see that indeed we have a nice looking stretch in the stars coming out, and our data is really starting to show. All right, so now that we have our first stretched layer here, what's always interesting to look at is the channels. I've always said this. If you go into, if you're imaging with a narrowband filter, or individual filters, if you did individual filters and you have a filter wheel, well, you're going to have individual channels that you're going to have to stretch anyways. Or you might have recombined that when you stack them and then you're doing this process and align them. But if you have a one-shot color narrowband filter like I do, the Triad Ultra filter, or like the L Extreme, L Enhance, now you can come in and kind of look at your data and look at the signals in each of the channels. So red is going to be, for me, sulfur 2 and hydrogen alpha. Green is going to be our oxygen 3 signal. And then blue is hydrogen beta, which is really cool. Hydrogen beta is kind of unique. Some people complain and say, hey, you don't really get much unique data out of it. But it's more useful on some targets. I find ultimately that it's a really good signal to have. For me personally, when I'm combining data, it adds a little something I've noticed, and so I've grown to like it. So those are our channels there. And so now the point of this tutorial is narrowband image processing, and so what we want to do is separate out these channels. Okay, so this next step is very important, but before we get to it, I've just noticed something in my data here. If you look at the bottom, you can see that from stacking, there's some artifacts. And so sometimes you can just skip this step and don't crop and wait till the end. But sometimes I find that if you crop and kind of get this out of here ahead of time, when you do put it through StarNet++, etc., you get a little bit better results. So what I'm going to do is just go back to the RGB layer for a second, and sometimes I do kind of just a temporary stretch just to see where my line is, kind of say, oh yeah, in between these two stars, or pick some area you can notice some pattern and say, yeah, I need to pull the crop up to about this point right here. So I'm going to hit cancel. I'm going to go to my crop tool here, and I'm going to pull the data right up to where I kind of noticed that it needs to go. And I think this is good enough for now, and that actually helped center my target a little more, so that's nice. So let me just stretch this one more time to see if there's any other issues. There's some minor cropping that we can do at the top, but that's not anything significant. So I'm going to leave it alone from there on. Okay, so now we're in the channels again. And we're specifically in the red channel. So what I want to do now is the following. I want to go File, or well, before we do that, you're selected on the red channel, hit Control A on your keyboard. This selects your image. Then hit Control C. That copies your image. Then we go File, New, and you want to have the clipboard option selected. And this is super important. You want to go 16-bit, and you want it to be at grayscale. If you don't do 16-bit, StarNet++ will not accept it. Hit Create. A new image comes up, and you hit Control V because you had copied it. And now you have this gray 16-bit monochrome red channel image. So this is your red channel now separated out. And what I do is I go File, Save As. I'm going to save it right into here. And what I call this one is I just say HA. I know it's Sulfur2 and HA, but I just say HA Wizard. And I say, oh, this is with stars. And I hit save. And another thing you want to make sure you never do is don't do compression, else StarNet++ will not like it. So always choose no compression here, none, and hit OK. And it saves. And then, of course, you've probably guessed it by now, do the same procedure for each of the other channels, except you select now green here, Control A, Control C, File, New, 16-bit, you want clipboard selected, hit Create, comes up with a new one, Control V, paste in your green layer, File, Save As, and instead of the HA one now we want to save it as, this is our O3 data. Save, no compression, OK. Now we'll go to the blue layer, which is HBeta, Control A, Control C, File, New, 16-bit, Create, Control V, and Save As. And this is our HBeta signal now. Hit OK. And so now we've separated out each of our individual channels. And you can see that as I click through the data, that there's slightly different changes in the data. HA always contains the most amount of details, and O3 kind of has this slightly more cloudy kind of structure to it, but with slightly different details, and the same with HBeta. And so now we have these three layers. So for now, let's just go ahead and close out of them. We'll go back to in our original stretched image, just the RGB, have that selected. And then what I like to do is, of course, save this guy. Go ahead and just hit save for now. And then what I want to do after I save that version of it, I want to click everything here and go to flatten image. This just decreases the file size of your image, and it helps with StarNet++. And then what I want to do is save as here. I always like to put in that I did an arcsine hyperbolic stretch, and that this one is for StarNet. And it has stars. Then I hit save. No image compression. Okay. All right, so now I'm in the directory where I have my images, my stretched images here of the Wizard Nebula. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on, highlight the one that's my RGB colored image, that's for StarNet, and then my three separated out red, green, blue channels are my hydrogen alpha, hydrogen beta, and oxygen 3. Hit Control C, and then I'm going to go to the directory that I have my StarNet executable. So here's my StarNet++. And so now what you're going to see is something interesting. Typically, you just have a StarNet folder here. And inside your StarNet folder, of course, you have all these. You have the RGB StarNet++, and then the mono StarNet++. What I did was I copied that 4 different times, and I renamed each folder. First folder HA, second one HBeta, O3, and then RGB. And so in this top level where I've done that, I'm just going to paste the new files that I have in the top level directory. And what I do is I just say, okay, this HA one goes to the HA folder, this HBeta one goes to the HBeta folder, this O3 one goes to my O3, and then my RGB one, let's actually rename this. Typically I add in that it's RGB just so I don't confuse myself later on. This is my RGB StarNet++, and that goes in the RGB one. So now what I'm about to do is suitable only if you have a computer with a decent amount of RAM. my computer here has 32 gigabytes, and that seems to work quite well. I don't really know how much RAM it pulls when I do this, because what I do is I start having StarNet do each single one, each of these, I mean, at the same time. But if you can't do that because you don't have enough RAM, go ahead and just stick to doing one at a time. But what I'll do is I'll start with my RGB one. And what I do is I put my RGB one in my StarNet, RGB StarNet++. And I let that one start. And then I go to my HA, and I take my HA, and this time now we're going to go into the mono because it's a black and white image now. I'll lower that guy down some. And whoops. Now we'll go to the H beta, throw the H beta into the mono StarNet one. And then last but not least, the 03 here that I have left to do. 03 one goes into the mono StarNet. And so now I have my 3 StarNet plus, or sorry, 4 StarNet plus terminal shells kind of opened, showing the percent finished each one is. So this one's already at 5%. That was the RGB one. Then we're at the HA, H beta, and then 03. So I'm just going to go ahead and let these finish out, and we'll go from there. Okay, so now they finished with StarNet++. And so here's HA, for example. I'm going to look at the starless.tiff that it generated. And we can definitely see all the stars are removed, and we're left with just the nebulosity still in grayscale or monochrome. So now what I do is I just go ahead and I just start renaming them, but I rename it the same way I named it the first time, but instead of stars, I just do starless. So something like this. And I do that for each one. And I collect all the images and put it at the top level just to keep things organized. And then I move them back over to my main working directory. So I'm going to go ahead and do this for the rest of them. Okay, so now I have all the starless images collected. So I'm just going to move those back to the directory I'm currently working in. And so now I have a starless image and then a star image of each channel as well as the combined channel. So that's the star version of the HA and then the star removed version. The monochrome version of StarNet++ works really good at removing stars. Sometimes the RGB one is a little bit worse. You'll get some stars left behind, but for the most part, the monochrome one performs really well. So now that we have each one, the next step I typically do is denoising. So there's different ways to denoise. Previously, I said you can just use Photoshop and use their default denoise, or I think it's called like a luminance noise reduction tool in Camera Raw. But another good tool that I like to use is Topaz Denoise. So I have Topaz Denoise, and it is an artificial intelligence algorithm that does the denoise, but I find that it can really enhance your data through noise reduction. And so, for instance, I'll show you what I do on each of the channels. So I'll start with the starless. We don't do it on the star versions. We do it on the starless versions. And so I'm going to start with HA, open it up, and it kind of gives you a split screen view, defaults to 100%. So this is what my data looks like at 100%. So this is the original on the left, and right now it's also the original on the right. But any changes we do for denoise will be shown on the right, and the original will be kept so you can kind of see the differences. So this is one of those areas where you can really screw up your data if you push the noise removal too high or you don't recover original detail properly. So what I like to do is, since it's an artificial intelligence algorithm, it's going to go around trying to learn what the data looks like and compare it to something probably like a cloud, and remove common features that would be seen in such imagery. So what I like to do is recover detail to 100%. So what that means is it's going to keep all my original detail. No detail will be be lost. But then what I'm going to do is first I go to auto, and it kind of auto shows me what it thinks I need. Typically, it really over sharpens. And so we don't want to do over sharpening while removing noise too much. And so typically I'll back this down. But just to show you what it does at defaults, I'll go ahead and run this and we can look at the difference. All right, so you can see there's been some enhancement, but really not much. And so in this case, we could bump the remove noise to maybe like 10, update again, and see where we get to. And so this is why I say everything's done on a per channel level, because you kind of see how each channel might need these enhancements. So if you look over here, the detail around here and here in these various regions, you can see it's starting to clean up really well. Then I could even do like a zoom 50%. If you zoom out more to 50%, you have to re-update, but it just gives you another feel for how the data is looking. And it takes a little bit longer at the 50% view because it's now calculating it for all pixels at a 50% view. But this is just a preview view. When you go to save the image, it will apply it to your entire image and you have to wait for it to output. And so you can kind of look here at the differences of what it can compute. So if you don't want to recover 100% detail and you kind of want to let it do its own thing, you can do that. This is where you verge onto the area of an artistic side, because the data is not 100% correct. I mean, it is. They use the data you have, but it is leaning more toward heavily on the algorithm, so to speak. And so I'm gonna hit update here and show you the difference now when you change the recover original detail just a little more. So you can see the differences now. It's starting to look a lot cleaner, signal a little bit brighter. But what happens, say, if I say don't recover any detail and I hit update, this is where you'll probably see the most extreme changes in the data. And so we don't like that all the way. It looks really good, but since this is the first denoise in our series, we don't want to go overkill here. So maybe I'll back it to like 70 and hit update, and it keeps the data looking clean, but definitely it has sharpened it up rather nicely. And so I'll go ahead and just save that image. I keep the default name because it appends denoise AI on it, and I hit save, and it just saves right next to where the file where you had stored your files to begin with. So now I do this to each channel, kind of eyeballing it, what I think looks best in terms of denoise, and I try not to overdo it whatsoever. That's the key. So I'll come back when I've done the others. So it's basically the same process, except, you just look to see what looks best in terms of settings, kind of play around with it to what you think looks best. All right, so I'm back in Photoshop, and I have my original stretched image that we exported to TIFF and then ran StarNet on it. And this is the RGB version. And so these two, of course, is what I'm going to be using to create a stars only image. And so I'll go ahead and do that real quick. You guys have seen this before if you've watched my StarNet tutorial. I just go to apply image. I select the starless version and subtract, and I keep it a scale of 1, hit OK. And now I just have a stars only that I will work with later on during the star recombine. And I just come over here and rename this a stars only at the end so that I know this is my stars only layer. So then I'll go ahead and exit out of those two. And now what I have are my denoise channels. So I have my HA denoise, my H beta denoise, and my O3 denoise. And so this is going to be the start of recombination. And I really have 3 different methods for recombining separated channels into an overall channel. And I'll go ahead and begin showing you guys that one. I think I'm going to split the video here. And so this will be the first of the series, and I'll release the next series shortly. But with respect to processing this data, It'd be really cool if you guys do use this data and process it. I'd like to see it. So if you're on Instagram or anything, go ahead and tag me. I'll leave my Instagram handle in the description. I'd like to see your work and how you process this data following this tutorial. It's really cool when I get to see that. I appreciate it. And with respect to Topaz Denoise, it is a separate software package that you have to purchase. When I purchased it, it was like, I forget, $55 and I found a discount on it. And so if you wait around or look for a discount, you can get it. That's if you want it, or you can just do Photoshop's denoise. It's really up to you how you want to go about doing denoise. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.